Hey guys, so I had no video planned for today until I found this. This video is a video that I feel like I have to respond to. This is a video, well, you can read the title. This video is a video having some pretty harsh criticism of FL Studio. If you're not aware, I make music in FL Studio. And I'd say, even though I'm not a professional, I take it quite seriously, and I have learned quite a lot over the years. I've been doing it since I was 11. Maybe that doesn't mean so much to you, because I am 19 now, but I have been doing it since I was 11, so I'm pretty experienced in FL Studio at this point, and I suppose the best example of what I can do is probably this track right here, Synesthesia. So although I am not technically a professional when it comes to music, I don't do it as a job and I don't make any money off of it, considering I'm able to do stuff like that, I would say that I should know enough to be able to talk on this subject. This video, I get a very bad vibe on. So, okay, there's a few bits of context I need to give you to start out, for any of you watching who might not know anything about making music. So, there are a lot of different DAWs out there, or DAWs. DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and then the names of these applications you make music in. There are many out there, but online most people either use FL Studio or Ableton. Now, out of those two, FL Studio is often mocked because inside industries, like actual professional music making environments, FL Studio is practically unheard of. And Ableton, while still not the industry standard, is somewhat common in actual professional circumstances. The most common is apparently Pro Tools. I wouldn't exactly know, but that's what I've heard. That Pro Tools is the most common thing used as a DAW if you're actually making it for like a proper film or a TV show or whatever. But either way, online, most people who talk about making music online are either Ableton gang or FL gang. And personally, I've always found this debate kind of stupid. Because at the end of the day, the DAW itself is kind of just a box to contain all your synthesizers and your notes. And if you have the synthesizers, if you know how to use the synthesizers you have, if you have good synthesizers, and if you know how to make notes, good chords, good music, then you can have everything you need. I don't care really what DAW anyone uses, as long as their DAW is capable of adding synths from other places into it, so that they're not stuck with whatever synths the DAW has, which, yes, FL Studio can do that. By the way, this is unscripted if you couldn't tell. FL Studio can do that. FL Studio can add any synthesizer you want from anywhere else into itself, so that you're not stuck with just the FL Studio, like, native synthesizers, they're called, the ones that come with it. And so can Ableton, so no problem there. And in fact, it's not that uncommon to see people who use Ableton using FL Studio synths because they add the FL Studio synths into Ableton this way. But because of that, I feel like this debate is pretty pointless. It just comes down to which one are you more comfortable using. The only real difference is the way it's laid out and where the buttons are to do things. And so I've always felt like it's a pointless debate. Just would use whichever one you're comfortable with, which is usually whichever one you use first. Because even if one is technically, oh, maybe that's a bit more work to do, a lot of the time, people just end up finding it easiest to stick with whatever they try first. And for that reason, that's why most people usually stick with the same DAW. And I don't think there's a problem with that. I think you just use whichever DAW you're given, as long as it's got the basic capabilities of being able to put in whatever notes you want and being able to, as I say, use any synths or effects that you want. This is why I kind of hate this debate, but essentially this video is going to be about how Ableton is so much simpler and so much better than FL Studio. I'm going to play the intro of it now, And I'm going to try and let this guy talk for a while because I've tried to record this a couple of times before and I've got really rambly and started preempting points a bit too much. I don't want to make this come across like I'm putting words in this guy's mouth or not letting him speak. I'm going to try and let as much of this intro play without pausing.
Hey, it's longest solo ever. I talk a lot about not liking FL Studio, and a lot of that is exaggerated for the memes, but there is a reason I mention it so often. FL Studio is kind of the standard for music production in the Friday Night Funkin' world, but this is just about the only place that's true. There's a couple industry standard DAWs, or digital audio workstations. In professional recording studios, you're going to see Pro Tools being used about 99% of the time. Outside of those studios, as you get into EDM and hip-hop producers who are more likely to be working from home or on the road and don't need a big live studio, Ableton and Logic are by far the biggest players. Beyond that, you've got programs like Cubase, Reaper, and Studio One. FL Studio has its users, but definitely nothing resembling the market share of the ones I've mentioned. I want to start by saying there's two reasons I feel like I can have a strong opinion on this. One, I'm an experienced music producer. I've been doing this for a couple decades now, and I've got songs that have been licensed by major television networks. I've spent plenty of time with just about every piece of software out there, and I've had a lot of time to develop my opinions on them. Also, for the last 10 years, I've been a private music teacher. I've taught hundreds of students over the last decade, and the only ones I've ever seen have any real trouble with music production were the ones who insisted on using FL Studio because they'd already spent money on it. I can't count the number of times I've been walking a student through something and they ask me, why is this so hard? Why is it like this? Why do I have to do this crazy thing? And I have to say, well, in any other program, you don't. FL Studio is the only program like this. But we'll get to those specific things in a minute.
Already, there's a lot I want to say. So, he's made a few claims straight away. First of all, that he's saying that, very few people use FL Studio. It's not very much seen in the professional circumstances, and it's mostly used by the Friday Night Funkin' community. So, I want to tackle this because on its own, this is not necessarily too wrong, and it doesn't necessarily seem too bad to say this. Because I will say, yes, as far as I've seen, it doesn't seem like FL Studio is used in professional circumstances all that much. And that's not necessarily because it's a bad program. It's more because when the program was new, it's currently on FL Studio 20, but all the way back on the original version of FL Studio, it was very small scale, very much weak, and very much just something to play around with more than a proper music producing tool when it was much newer. However, as time has gone on, it's developed to the point where now it is a full-on music making program with everything you could possibly want. So I don't feel like the criticism against it holds water. I feel like a lot of it is just held over from back in the days when it did used to genuinely be very small scale. As well as that, I feel like a lot of these people who think FL Studio is extremely small scale and not very effective, probably haven't used it in years. And that's probably why it isn't very well adopted in like the actual professional areas, is mostly because it still has that air around it of, isn't it that tiny program that can't do anything? And of course, it's not been like that for years, decades, but that doesn't matter. People still have that impression of it. Anyway, it seems a little strange to me that he decides to specifically single out the Friday Night Funkin' community here. I believe this true. I mean, I haven't really looked into it. I am sort of a Friday Night Funkin' fan. I can't make up my mind. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it. So I'm not in the community enough to know for sure, but I believe it. It does seem like a decent amount of those things are made in FL Studio. But from what I've seen, FL Studio is a pretty dominant choice with most hobbyists online. People who aren't necessarily doing it for money, but they're just making music because they want to make music. So I don't know, it seems a little bit weird to me that he would single out the Friday Night Funkin' community as the people who use FL Studio, when really it's just about everyone online who uses music as a hobby rather than a job. I say about everyone, that's a bit far. As I say, it's a 50-50 between Ableton and FL Studio, mostly online, as far as I've seen. To me, there's a specific reason, I feel, why this guy wants to connote FL Studio users with Friday Night Funkin' mods. Because, of course, Friday Night Funkin' mods, again, not saying if you like them it's a bad thing, because of course they can genuinely have artistic merit to them, but they do have that stigma of being associated with, that's what kids like. And if you're the composer for a Friday Night Funkin' mod, it definitely doesn't sound like it has as much of an air of respect around it to a composer for TV shows like he says he is. And that's not for me to say that if you are a person who composes for Friday Night Funkin' mods, that you are less respectable than someone who composes for professional TV shows. It obviously depends on the actual music. People who compose professionally also are far less experimental because they have to do it for a job. And so they're often way less ambitious and they do way less interesting stuff, even if the stuff they do is usually more consistently of, quality. Either way, my point is, it seems weird that he wants to connect FL Studio and Friday Night Funkin', unless it's to try and drag down FL Studio. And I know this might seem a bit paranoid and tinfoil hatty right now, but remember, this is a constant feud that's been around for a while, this whole Ableton user versus FL Studio user. And a lot of the time, the opposition from FL Studio users, from what I've seen, mostly amounts to, haha, FL gang, am I right, guys? Whereas the opposition from Ableton users seems like a much more sincere hatred for FL Studio users. There's genuinely, I see a lot of snobbery, this whole, like, I've seen the argument that FL Studio is a toy from Ableton users a lot of the time. Sometimes completely unrelated. I've literally watched FL Studio tutorials before where out of nowhere, nothing to do with the video, the guy will just mention, oh, yeah, I usually use Ableton, but I'm doing an FL Studio tutorial for once. It's kind of a bit of a toy, but I guess it's gotten a bit better over the years. And it's like, what? This very off-putting attitude is obviously kind of a problem, and this video seems to be contributing to that attitude, even if not on purpose. I don't know. I feel like, essentially, I'm not sure that this guy's doing it on purpose, but I feel like they must be aware of how there's this kind of Ableton snobbery, oh, look, you use FL Studio, going on. I feel like he must be aware of it, and if he is aware of it, then surely he must be aware of how much it sounds like he's making points very adjacent to theirs. And again, to reiterate, literally everything you can do in Ableton is also possible in FL Studio. All it comes down to is a different layout. Maybe you can do some things a little bit faster in Ableton, maybe you can do some things a little bit faster in FL Studio. That kind of stuff. It's like, it's really not a big deal. And yet you often see the point made that, yes, you should use FL Studio. Clearly that's just, you're just getting started. Oh, you're just a beginner. Oh, who can blame you? Well, one day you'll learn how to use Ableton. One day you'll be good enough to be able to use that. It's like, what the hell?
I want to be clear. If you like using FL Studio, this is not me saying you're wrong to use it, or that the music you're making isn't good because of that. I'm just saying I don't think FL is the best tool for music producers, especially beginners, and there's a few reasons why.
So a lot of people might say this video seems unfair, that because he just said, of course, he's not saying that you can't make good music with FL Studio. However, he is still trying to make the point he considers it to be one of the worst options out there, considering he mentioned, 5, 6 other options earlier in the intro, which he clearly thinks must be better, considering he said earlier that in any other music-making program, you don't have to go through all these complicated steps, when he was talking vaguely about issues he had with his students trying to learn FL Studio. Which, by the way, I meant to mention earlier, I'm very skeptical about that, considering that, we're going to see later, he has quite a few times where he clearly doesn't know the fastest way to do something in FL Studio. And that's fair enough. He's an Ableton user. He doesn't use FL Studio. That's fair enough. If his point in this video was just, I've always preferred Ableton because I can deal with this better, and this seems a bit confusing to me, then that's fine. But his point isn't just, this is why I prefer to use Ableton. His point is trying to be, this is why no one should really use FL Studio, especially not beginners. And this is why Ableton is actually so much simpler and so much better to understand. He's not just saying, this is better for me. He is trying to make the point in this video that Ableton would be better for just about everyone, which is a bit off-putting to me, especially considering he shows a severe lack of knowledge of how FL actually works later in this video.
FL Studio was originally Fruity Loops, named that because it was a loop-based program. You'd create short little one-measure pieces of music that you could repeat or loop in different combinations to create a full song. The original Fruity Loops was basically a 4-channel drum machine. No audio capabilities, barely any ability to write actual music into it beyond the drums. Over the years,
True. And that's why I think that it still has this stigma around it, is the oldest versions of Fruity Loops were that simple and were that limited.
They've tacked on stuff like a proper piano roll, automation, some very capable synthesizers, and the ability to actually record audio. Sort of. More on that in a minute. But because it's all built on this original design of this fun little toy where you can put loops together.
You get some weird vibes from that, don't you? Okay, I get some very weird vibes from that. Maybe it's just me, because that's such a common argument I hear from Ableton snobs, that FL Studio is a toy. And I will admit he's kind of half right about the first version of FL Studio, but it instantly set off like little alarm bells in my head that he's calling it a toy specifically. It seems to me like he's very much aware of how other Ableton users, who maybe are a bit more vocal about their opinion, think of FL Studio.
Everything stacked on top of it is a twisted and confusing mess. Let's go through the standard FL Studio workflow just to put together a basic song. You'll see what I mean. When you open a fresh copy of FL Studio, you'll be greeted with this screen, an empty row of tracks, a nice little drum sequencer helpfully set up with a basic drum kit to get you started. That's nice. Now, this works like most 16-step drum sequencers. You click on a button to add a note, and you can... Oh, you have to right-click on it to get rid of them. Okay.
Are you serious? So this is his first criticism of the studio. The first thing he thinks he needs to point out is that you right-click to remove things instead of clicking the thing that's already there. Is it just me, and I know it's not going to just be me, or is that, like, not even a problem in the first place? Like, nitpick at best. If anything, it's kind of better, because you can't accidentally remove something when you meant to place something next to it. Instead, if you're left-clicking, nothing's going to happen if you're trying to put it on top of something, therefore you won't accidentally remove something you didn't mean to remove. You can only remove things on purpose if you have to right-click to remove them. If anything, I think this is better for beginners. So, that's another thing. I actually should get this out of the way now. I should have mentioned this earlier. I also take issue with the fact that he specifically wants to say it's bad for beginners. I think there's a very good reason for this, because on its own that might sound fine. It might be you could say, oh, so he might be making the argument that FL Studio is actually a fair enough like program for making music once you get good and understand it, but that it's just bad for beginners. But that's clearly not the argument he's making. It's already got a reputation for attracting beginners, so the main argument most people would have against FL Studio is that because it attracts beginners, it's oversimplified and dumb. And also, I think this is a good time to mention that although it is rare to see FL Studio used in a professional circumstance, it definitely isn't unheard of. Off the top of my head right now, I obviously don't research into exactly what DAWs every single music producer ever uses, but off the top of my head I can tell you I listen to a lot of dubstep on Disciple, and Samplifier and Eliminate on there are both dubstep producers who are very well known and respected who use FL Studio only, as far as I've seen. Anyway, so the fact that he's trying to say, well, this is bad for beginners, is kind of interesting. Because one of the reasons I especially want to defend FL Studio is the same reason I got into FL Studio. Because I did say that I don't think it matters too much which one you pick. I think that it's just down to whichever one you try first you'll get comfortable with, and you stick with it, and that's fine. But I would still recommend FL Studio to new people, not just because it's like, oh, I use that one. I probably wouldn't recommend it to someone who's like trying to get into the music industry, but if you just want to make music for the fun of it, or just to learn a new skill, I would recommend FL Studio because it's one of the most accessible. As in, you don't have to pay so much up front, especially because its demo is free. And you might be like, who cares, it's the demo. Well, actually, the demo is really, really good. The demo literally allows you to do just about everything the full version does, except save. And don't get me wrong, the fact you can't save sucks, but you can even export the music you make in the demo. You can make a full track in the demo as long as you can do it all in one sitting without turning off your computer. In fact, you don't even have to do that. You can make parts of your full piece of music without in one sitting, record those parts, and then put those parts together to make your full piece of music, even after closing the program multiple times. So even without saving, you're capable of doing a lot inside FL Studio. Like a surprising amount. So, considering that, that is why I like to defend FL Studio. I'm not going to say it objectively has the best layout, because I think it's a very stupid argument that's ultimately very fruitless. I very much like the layout of FL Studio, probably because I use FL Studio all the time, and that means I'm very familiar with it, and its logic makes and workflow makes a lot of sense to me. But I would still recommend it, as I say, just because it's mostly accessible. Whereas Ableton is a lot more kind of upfront money being paid to try and get into it, which means a lot of people are going to be pushed away straight away. I like how FL Studio is something that people can get into without necessarily having to put all the money up front and take a risk. They can just try it out if they aspire to get better at making music. So why have I gone on this long rant about why I love FL Studio? Well, it's because clearly if this guy's trying to mostly make his argument that this is awful for beginners, he's trying to drive away these beginners. And I get that he's just trying to do it probably because he doesn't like FL Studio and he thinks it has a bad layout and all that. But this honestly seems very short-sighted to me and not very considerate of how it's like for newer people, because you're now creating this stigma around one of the only accessible options they have for music production of, oh yeah, but it's really complicated, oh, and it's not as good as the other ones, and oof. I'm not saying that you can't make good stuff with it, but it's kind of a toy. It's like I kind of hate that air to this video, even if that's not necessarily what they might have intended. I really don't like it. But anyway, I've already stopped this long at the first point. I'm talking too long. I'll cut myself off there. Let me get to the points where I could really disprove this guy later on.
Fine, that's fine. I would have figured that out eventually. Sure. So let's write a drum beat. And press spacebar to hear it. Cool. Okay, now, what's next? I want to write more than just a one-measure drum loop. And here's where we get into patterns. This is FL Studio's first helpful way of driving you completely insane. You see, this one-measure loop of music isn't actually part of your song yet. It exists in this weird pocket dimension called a pattern. By writing it here, you're filling up this imaginary box over here. To make it part of your song, you have to paint it onto your track.
What is the problem with that? Like, actually, genuinely, what is the problem with that? Like, I imagine there's a decent amount of you watching right now who have never touched a music production software, because this is obviously not my music channel. Oh yeah, by the way, I probably should have put this on my music channel, but of course it's a low effort video and I want to have higher effort videos on there. Besides, more of you will watch it this way and I kind of want to get the word out. But I imagine those of you out there who have never used a music making program could still completely follow what's just happened. You made the drum beat in the box, and then you put the box in your song. And in fact, it's kind of funny that he's complaining about this system when he's just used it to do exactly what it's used for. The main advantage of the system is, say now that drum beat he just made, he wants to repeat that over and over and over, and he's going to have some other things playing alongside the drum beat so it doesn't get too repetitive, and those are going to change, but the drum beat's going to stay the same. Well, if he wanted to do that and he didn't have patterns, he would literally have to continue the drum beat, like place everything back in the perfect positions, exactly the same as the last measure, every single time, 4 times over. Only in FL Studio's way of working, much simpler, he just clicks here and drags over here, and he gets 4. He only had to make it once, and then put 4 of these boxes in. I feel like he's already demonstrated why FL Studio has some strengths to its workflow, and I don't see how this is a problem. I guess what especially bothers me is like, oh, and I have to paint it on. Like, that's so abstract. Like, I'm sure that every single one of you watching understood what just happened. He left-clicked on the box where all his song stuff goes to place the boxes which have his drum beat in. Like, he says paint it on like it's so abstract, but I mean, quite literally, you click and it gets placed. Like, it's very simple. It's very weird that he feels the need to act like it's so abstract to paint it on. Ooh, it's...
Okay, now let's press play. Think you're hearing your song? Wrong. You didn't switch it from pattern mode, or pat, to song mode, you fool.
Okay, if you personally are on the side of the guy making this video still at this point, don't worry, I'm not going to be unfair. This is one small point I will give him. I don't think it really matters much, but I'll give him this. This is a little bit unintuitive, and it's 100% true. It is not something that you can get around with a simple keyboard shortcut. Yes, when you open a new version of FL Studio, it will automatically be in, let's see, new from template, basic. Well, I think it will be basic with limiter when you create a new project by default. I usually open empty, so I'm kind of not used to it. It will be open like this, and it'll be on pattern mode, which means that technically your song is in here. I've got nothing in here, so I shouldn't hear anything if I play it, because even though I've got stuff in here, that's not here. But I do hear this. That's because, of course, I need to create a pattern to put in my song before there can even be a song yet. So it makes sense that it starts on pattern mode, because before I can even listen to the song, I need to create a pattern to put in the song, and then switch to song mode to hear that pattern. And I'll admit, that's a little bit confusing, a teensy bit confusing to brand new people. I have seen once or twice people who've never used FL Studio create a couple things, and then when they don't hear both of them at the same time because they're only listening to one pattern at a time, and even though they put them both here in the track in the playlist, and then played it, they're still on song pattern mode and they can't hear the actual song because they're not on song mode. I'll admit, yes, that can confuse very, very new people, but how much do you have to learn to deal with this issue? You have to learn, oh, so I have to click this button to switch. That's it. Like, I'll admit it's a problem. It's a small issue. It's a very small issue, though. And this is never an issue again once you learn that. It's not really a recurring problem, I would say. But I will say, he's right. There's no getting around that. That is true. That is simply one of the downsides of the pattern system, which clearly he very much doesn't like. But of course, I'm going to give some defenses for it. But that is definitely a downside of it you can't avoid.
Okay, fine. That makes sense, I guess. I want to add some more instruments. Let's add a bass. To do that, we go back to our channel rack where all these drums are hanging out, which, sure, let's put the bass in there too. Let's press this plus sign button down here. Assume I know which of these 100 different synthesizers is good for making a bass. Let's go with...
Actually fair. Although, I believe that's a problem in most stores. I don't know, of course I've mostly just used FL Studio, but I'm pretty sure that's not necessarily a problem unique to FL Studio. However, yeah, it's true, it's a problem. About 90% of these are useless. Okay, that's harsh. About 50% of these are useless, 40% are very niche, and 10% are actually useful. However, those 10% that are actually useful are super good. Citrus is amazing, Harmor is amazing. There's some really good FL Studio synths, it's just that you have to dig through the trash to find them. I'll give him that one.
This one. And wait, what? What am I gonna do with that? This isn't a drum. What does this even do if I put notes here? Does this just play the same note over and over again? Oh my god. I don't...
And, you know what? Again, I'm not being unfair here. I'll give him this point as well. I actually have my own suggestion for image line here. I'm very confused. So he's actually... I'll let the video play on, because he's about to show what I'm about to talk about.
I don't know what I expected. I need a piano roll. I need to write notes. Can I right-click on something? Oh, thank God, a piano roll. There we go. Wait, what are these notes already here? Is that... Those are the drums. Why are the drums here? Oh, because we're in the same pattern. Right. Wait, why are they all on the same line? Why are they all on C?
Oh boy, we're gonna get back to that one, because this is one where he is just straight up factually wrong, but we'll get back to that. Oh yeah, I don't know why this is happening. When I pause a video, a second later it goes dark. I don't know why this is happening. It just started happening.
I can't tell which of these notes is which drum. This is terrible. Okay, fine. Let's close out of that. We make a new pattern. I have to go up to this and add a new pattern. Let's name this one bass. And just to be thorough, let's name this first one drums. There we go. Good. Okay, now go back to the channel rack, right click, piano roll. Okay, let's write a bass line.
So, yes, if you want to actually place notes instead of just playing a sound effect, I'm going to open a 3x oscillator like he did. And if you want to place notes... you would have to... Oh wait, that's the panning, doy. If you want to place notes, you would have to do it in the piano roll, because if you try to do it in here, obviously I can say that I want something to play here, but I can't say its pitch. Well, you kind of can using this, but you really shouldn't be using this to change your pitch. So, that's fair enough. In fact, that is probably my biggest problem with literally all of FL Studio. Because when I was brand new to FL Studio, brand new, I actually could not figure out how to play a note. Like, genuinely, I couldn't figure out how to play a note. Because I thought, oh, this is where I put in notes, but it doesn't change a note. How do I change a note? And I did not think to right-click this, and I didn't know what a piano roll was, so I didn't know to click this. So, I'll give him that. This is 100% fair, and this is one of my biggest issues. One thing I've never understood is why ImageLine doesn't just... the ImageLine is the people who make FL Studio. I don't understand why they don't just make it so that... Essentially, you can click this, and it will make it so that these are all these boxes, and when you click on them, they go on the piano roll. And they show the notes. I don't understand why they don't just make it so if your sound isn't a drum, it automatically shows like this. I understand that technically you could have like a bit of ambiguity over whether your sound is a drum or not. For example, you can make synthetic drums. So what if you have a synthesizer, but you change the settings so the synthesizer is playing a drum sound? But that's very niche. Like, I think that they should just make it, if the sound is a synthesizer or a piano or a violin or whatever, then it shows this as a piano roll. Whereas if it's a sampler, which has a recorded sound in it and simply plays it back, which is almost always used for drums, they should just have it be in stack sequencer mode. I fully agree on that. They should do it like that. They unfortunately don't. Fair point. Get back to the video.
Okay, great, wonderful. Let's take a listen. Oh, right, I've got to paint this on because this isn't a music program, it's a frickin' painting class.
Once again, this isn't a music program, this is a painting class. Again, that kind of, oh, this isn't even a music program, this is just so badly made, it's not even good enough to be a music program. That kind of attitude. I know that he's probably not doing it on purpose, but it keeps seeping through, doesn't it?
Fine, there we go. Great. Okay. I kind of want that second half to be a little different, so can we... all right. I want to copy and paste what I've already got here. So let's select everything, copy, and can I decide where I paste it or just... Oh, okay. It's going to just paste... All right. Can I put it here? Nope. Wait. What? Why can't I... Oh, no. FL...
There is so much wrong with what I just saw. So this guy says that he said earlier that he felt like he was qualified to talk on this topic because he's tried many different DAWs in the past, and of course he's got, like, you know, music and TV shows and all that. And I'm not going to say this guy's better at making music. I don't know. I'm not going to speak on that. But I'm very skeptical he's given much time to learning FL Studio. I imagine he's dipped his toe in, thought, I don't like this, and then ran away from it. And that's fair enough. If you're just trying to say, I personally don't like using it. Again, though, I have a problem with that because with his limited knowledge, he's trying to say, oh, this is a garbage music making program. And not that he just doesn't know how to use it. So, this seems like a very valid complaint. Because, oh no, he wants to... Okay, in fact, first of all, let me actually catch up to him. Let me make my own drum beat and let me make my own bass line. Just quickly. So there we go, we got that. Okay, so I've now got my own bass line and drums like him. And sure enough, I have the same issue of, that doesn't sound right, I want to make this bit different. The easiest way they could have gone about this, which maybe they knew this existed and they just chose not to, but I would be surprised, is they could simply right-click this and go and make unique. Now, fair enough, there's a lot of options on this menu. Who would have known this was here? Except, if you've seen anyone use FL Studio who's experienced with it, you would have seen them use this. This is a very commonly used feature with even though I understand it isn't a right-click menu, this is something you see all the time to the point where it's one of the few features that actually went out of their way to take out of the demo version, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, a few quality of life features are missing in the demo version, and Make Unique is one of them. So yeah, this is a very commonly used feature. And so the fact he didn't know it existed raised an eyebrow to me. At least it seems like that, because that's what makes the most sense. If I click Make Unique, this is now a new pattern, but it still has everything the old pattern did. So if I want to do the same thing again, but with a small difference, all I have to do is take this and change it. And so, sure enough, if I play that... it's worked. Now, what they do instead is they don't create a new pattern, they don't use Make Unique, they go to the pattern they already have and they try to elongate it. Fair enough, that makes sense. But the way they do it is, first of all, they select the top bar. You do realize you can just select the notes like that. That's already a little bit weird that you're trying to do it like this. It does work, yes, because you can copy the notes this way. However, it has a bit of an issue, which is, say you accidentally click off when you do this. Uh-oh, you still have selected this section. Now, say I've got some more bit here that I want to hear. I've got some more of this going on over here, and I want to hear this bit. Uh-oh, it looped before it could get to it. And no matter how many times I click off this side bit, it's not going to stop that. Because, of course, you selected this bit, you have to double-click on the bar up there to unselect it. So already the fact that he's deciding to select these using this is telling me, ooh, probably not use FL Studio that much. I mean, it works. You can do it like that if you want. I wouldn't recommend it because it's better to just select the notes directly like that. But then, as well as that, when he pastes it, he does a lot of things wrong. So, you can use Control-C to copy, as you can in just about any program. And of course, you can use Control-V to paste. Only problem is, this cannot paste on top of what you already have, so it pastes it one position to the side. Oh no! Nothing can be done about that. Oh, I just drag it to the correct position. Quite easy. But wait, didn't he have a problem with that? Oh, that's right. His was snapping to the wrong position. Let's just rewind that for a second.
Select everything, copy, and can I decide where I paste it or just... Oh, okay, it's going to just paste... All right, can I put it here? Nope. Wait, what?
Well, that's strange. Why could I just drag it into the correct position and his wouldn't snap to the correct position? I wonder why. Okay, I could understand this somewhat if he genuinely hadn't messed with the snapping tool. Because essentially, yes, what can happen is, because it will try and move this over to the right by a small amount to make it not overlap, it can happen that it will move it to the right by amount smaller than the amount you snap to. And if that happens, you have to reduce the amount that it snaps to so that it can appear in the right place. True. The only thing is, this is confusing for beginners, yes, except for the fact that when you open FL Studio, by default, it's on snap to quarter beats, which is what is currently happening. And his is on snap to half beats, which isn't the default, which means he must have manually changed it to this, and now he's complaining about the thing he manually changed it to. Because it's not like this by default. And now I'm going to have the problem he had. I can't snap it to this. Because I've got it to set to snap to half beats. You have to set it back to snap to quarter beats to make it go in the right spot. Or you can just turn off snapping altogether. No, missed it. There we go. And have it go anywhere. But you probably want it on snap to quarter beats. So, all that said, you might still say, I don't know, like, I kind of get your point. He's clearly not done it the best way possible. But he's kind of got a point. Isn't it clunky that you can't paste something wherever you want? He's wrong on two different fronts here. First of all, let me press Control-B. Yep, you can just press Control-B. And let me also just flex and undo this. Oh, we're going to get back to this, don't you worry. Yes, I did just use undo multiple times. We'll get back to that. Anyway, getting back on point. Not only can you use Control-B to make it so that it just pastes next to it, but you could say, oh, okay, right, fair enough. But he didn't know that keyboard shortcut, and also, it still sucks because you can only put it next to it. You still can't control where it goes. I'm now going to use Control-V again. Yes, you can control where it pastes. You just have to move the screen. That's all you have to do. I am very skeptical this guy's actually put much time into using FL Studio if he hasn't yet figured out that there are multiple ways you can get around this problem of pasting. But let's continue watching. Is there anything else wrong with the points he's going to make?
Why can't I? Oh, no. FL Studio very helpfully will not snap to the right notes. No matter what you want it to do, it will decide to snap them entirely somewhere else. I cannot get it to start on the beginning of this beat.
We've already covered the multiple ways you can get around this issue and the multiple ways he's wrong here. But we'll let him continue.
And you know what the official answer is? I combed through the FL Studio help forums. The official answer from ImageLine employees is drag it back to the beginning of the session and then just kind of slam it against the wall here until it's in place. and then you can put it where you need it. That's the official help desk recommended solution.
Considering how many other solutions I just presented, I'm kind of skeptical this guy really combed through the FL Studio help. Like, I'm just saying, like, I'm not surprised maybe someone did say that's a solution, because you can do it that way. But, like, if I really don't think you looked that long, that hard. If that was the solution you found, if that was the only solution you found, if you never found that, oh, I can change what it snaps to. Oh, I can also just use Control B. Oh, I can also actually control where it pastes with Control V if I just move the scroll bar. You didn't find any of that, huh? Moving on.
God damn it. Can you decide where FL Studio pastes things? No. No,
Yes.
there's no cursor to paste things. It always just kind of helpfully pastes it at the left corner of your screen. Fine. That's okay. Let's move on to mixing. I want to adjust some of these volumes, get things balanced. Let's just find where our bass track is coming in. Wait. I only have 2 tracks here, and there's 4 coming out here. Are those?
So for any of you watching who don't know anything about music production, can you figure out what's going on here?
Wait.
So, okay, actually, I'll give a bit of context, because some of you might not even know what a mixer is. This mixer is essentially stuff where basically you put the sounds that you make to be able to put effects on them to make them sound good, because a lot of sounds before you put effects on them don't sound very good. You put them into a mixer track. They go through this track before they come out of your computer as sound. All of these tracks are routed to this track on the left, the master track, and only stuff that goes to the master track can be heard. So, essentially, this guy is a little bit confused because he's like, well, we've got 2 tracks up here, but there's 4 here. Now, I bet even a few of you who've never used music production can figure out what's going on here, especially by listening to what's being played and when the volume goes up on these tracks.
Wait.
Have you figured it out?
I only have 2 tracks here, and there's 4 coming out here. Are those my drums? Are those only my drums? Let me listen. I have them all muted. Where is the bass track coming from?
So, okay. I will admit there's a valid point he's just made. One of the few valid points I'll actually give him quite a lot credit for. But before we get to that, the 4 tracks that are currently putting out volume are for the drums. As in, 1 for each drum. Not the whole drums is in 1 track, 1 for each drum. Now, that I don't feel is too cryptic. I mean, it makes sense. You have 4 sounds. They all have a mixer track of their own. Now, what he's about to complain about is the fact that the bass doesn't have a mixer track. And in fact, he's muted all of his tracks, but the bass can still be heard. I will admit, this one I'll give him. Essentially, he added the bass to the project and it didn't start in there. Because of that, the bass hasn't been given a mixer track. He has to add it to a mixer track for it to have a mixer track. And since it hasn't been added to one, that means that it never goes into any of these tracks, so he can't mute it. But the thing is, what that should logically do is make it so you can't hear it at all. But obviously, that would be confusing to new people in FL Studio, is if you added a new synth, and because it hadn't been added to a track yet, it made no sound no matter what you did. So, you can still hear the new sound, even though it's not routed to any of these tracks. But that's confusing to some people, because obviously, in theory, something should have to be routed to a mixer track to be able to even get to the master track. So the fact that he has all his tracks muted right now, but he can still hear stuff because his bass isn't routed to any track, but still comes out the master, I'll admit, it's a little bit convoluted, it's a little bit confusing, but I feel like this is kind of more... I think it works the opposite way that he thinks. Like, he's saying this is confusing for beginners. I think it's more confusing for people the other way round. Like, if you're a beginner, you're probably not even into all this mixer tracks, like, shenanigans. You probably don't even realize that the master track even exists at this point if you're really a beginner. So you just think, oh, all sound get played, and it doesn't become unnecessarily confusing that this thing doesn't have a mixer track because, well, you're just learning what a mixer track is. You didn't ever select it to have a mixer track, so it kind of makes sense, I think, that it doesn't have a mixer track. I will admit, though, it's a semi-valid criticism. It's definitely a little bit unintuitive and a bit weird to get your head around. Everything should really have a mixer track, so you should probably remember to add everything you make to a mixer track. So I'll give him some points there.
Oh, that's right. In FL Studio, you have to manually assign a mixer track for every single instrument you make. Until you do, it just kind of exists in the freaking upside down, just coming from nowhere and messing up your mix. If you forget to do this, your mix literally doesn't exist. So, okay, fine. Let's
You do okay, right? I do have to say he's not wrong here, but I have to kind of raise an eyebrow at. Oh, if you forget to do this, are you really gonna forget? One, it's gonna be pretty noticeable if your sounds don't have any effects on them, and two, even if that's the case, you're not gonna notice the big dash here with no number on it. Like, I don't know. I feel like you'd notice that, but sure,
if
whatever.
you forget to do this, your mix literally doesn't exist. So, okay, fine. Let's assign this to track 5. That's the next one. Great. And there it is. Love it. Finally, I can control the volume of an instrument. That only took several clicks just to make it freaking exist in my mixer. Fine. I want to add one more instrument here. Let's add this thing. We'll put it on track 6 because now I know that's a thing. Fine. And this is gonna play some. Oh, don't forget make a new pattern. Right. This is gonna play some chords. Okay, and now I'll paint it. Oh, I put it on the wrong track. Wait, what happens if I just play that now? Wait, isn't that on the bass track?
So, are any of you confused about what just happened? I imagine most of you probably aren't. You can see there's bass here. Oh wait, you can't see my finger in real life. There's bass here, and there's drums here. And then the drums stop because there's no more drums here, and there's chords here. And the bass also stops. So you can kind of tell that what's going to happen is what happens. The drum stops, the bass stops, the chords start. That makes sense. However, this guy clearly is very used to Ableton. And so what he's about to say is something that's only the case in Ableton.
Wait, isn't that on the bass track? Shouldn't that sound like a bass? No, you can just put stuff anywhere. You can literally, I could put all of these things on top of each other, just squished all together in one big mess of absolute nonsense, because nothing means anything in FL Studio.
Why the hell would you do that, then? That's something you have to do on purpose. Like, I don't see how that's a issue. Okay, so if anything, this is I feel like a big point of like what I'm trying to say. He has some points that are potentially good, but the problem is all of them are very subjective and very much from the perspective of like an Ableton user. Which again, that's fine. I'm not saying it's bad if you use Ableton, but considering that he's trying to make an objective argument that FL Studio is bad, I really disagree. So he's basically complaining about the fact that, say for instance, what I could do as well is I could have the bass line I made be on the same track as the drums here. So, you see, he has a problem with the fact that you can have two different sounds on the same track. Because in Ableton, what would happen is, no matter what sound is in track 7 right now, that would correspond to mixer track 7. So even if I never told the citrus patch that I have here, hey, I want you to be in group 7, if this was Ableton, it would instantly be put into track 7 automatically. And I will admit, to some people that probably is very convenient. It's probably very convenient having it automatically go into a track, and you know which track it is, it's the track number here. However, it's also very inconvenient depending on the circumstances, and this is where we get into the subjective thing. You see, as you can see, I have this routed to track 26, so even though this is in track 7, on the mixer, it's in track 26, and that's because I have a whole bunch of other stuff here that is in the previous tracks. I just want to put this in whichever track is free first, and at the time I made this, that was the 26th track. Anyway, this way of working that Ableton has, where once you put one sound in a track, everything in that track has to be that same sound or be mastered in that same way, sounds like it makes a decent amount of sense until you put it into practice in certain tracks. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad way to work, I'm saying you can't exactly call it objectively better. Because here's quite a complicated track, the track I showed you earlier. How would this look if I made it so that you could only fit one track, fit one instrument on a track throughout the whole thing? Because already you can see I'm struggling to fit everything on the screen that I have going on here. If I have to make it so everything has its own individual track, I have to drag all of this all the way down, like, how far? Track. Oh, I just realized this automation would count as well. Oh my, yeah, okay. How many? Oh boy, I don't even know how to start this. So I did it for just these 8 bars alone, and I would have to take up a grand total of 63 tracks if I wanted to do this the Ableton way. Now, again, that doesn't mean the Ableton way is objectively worse in every way possible. I'm just saying there are times at which the FL Studio way is better, there's times at which the Ableton way is better. The way tracks work is somewhat more intuitive in Ableton, but the extra control in FL of being able to choose which instrument goes into which individual track, instead of having it be, well, you placed it here, so now it's on this track whether you like it or not, is very convenient for me, and definitely for these extremely complicated, large-scale dubstep tracks, definitely works better for me. And I only did it for this 8 bars. I didn't bother with doing it here because it was too much work. And I'd just like to point out that the second drop for this is even busier and would have taken up even more tracks. I think you get the idea. Anyway, back to the video.
These can all coexist on the same track because remember, that has nothing to do with how they sit in the mixer. So just it's all just there. Fine. Ah, God. Okay, let's undo that. Wait. There's only one undo?
Oh boy! Am I going to have a lot to say about this?
I can only undo one time in FL Studio? It's 2022 and there is only one undo in FL Studio. Come on. Oh, there's a where is it? There's an undo history. That's handy. Okay. Wait. Those are things I did at the beginning. Are you telling me it's from the top the stuff I just did is at the bottom of this list? I have to scroll down? Fine. Let's go back. Let's go back a little bit and yeah, okay. Good. Good job, FL Studio. Fine, thank you.
So, I kind of messed up my project here, so let me just use the undo feature to, fix that. Only problem is, oh no, I can only do one undo. I actually don't know where that is. But apparently I can only do one undo. What a shame. Because it just redos it if I press Ctrl Z again, which is what he's doing. He's pressing Ctrl Z, which is universally the button for undo, the shortcut for undo in most programs. I guess there's just nothing we can do. Notice how my mouse isn't moving right now. You know what I did? I pressed Alt, and now I can undo as much as I like. I think I've made my point. How did this guy not think to check for any other way to undo? Like, come on, Control... You didn't think to try holding Alt? You were already doing Control Z, or like Shift or something? Like, you didn't think to look that up maybe before you made that criticism? You didn't think to... Okay? Bit sussy.
Let's just record some audio. I'm just gonna hit the record button and see what happens. And what would you like to record? Why are there two different audio options? What's an Edison? What notes and automate? What does everything mean? Show me some more. Yeah, I bet that button gets clicked a lot.
Okay, so I am going to say this is the main point of the video I will fully agree with. Recording audio in FL Studio is fucking stupid. Luckily for me, that's not much of a problem because I do very little of recording actual audio. I basically use synthesizers for everything I make for the most part. But yes, if you're going to try and make music by like taking recordings of you playing an instrument and then putting them together, if that's what you were planning on doing, then I will admit FL Studio probably isn't your best pick because the recording system in FL Studio, I will fully admit, is very stupid. However, is criticism of these options, I've got to say, I don't think they hold up. For example, I think that this is not too unintuitive. I do agree. The first option is audio into the Edison or audio editor slash recorder. So Edison is the main effect plugin used in FL Studio to record and edit audio. So that's why it's the top option. However, of course, Edison being one of the effects out of the multiple, like, massive pool of effects in FL Studio, it's completely understandable that a new person would have no idea what Edison is, have no idea what it would do, has no idea why it's the top option. Yeah, I kind of get it. I think that's a fair argument. Audio into the playlist is an audio clip. I feel like that's pretty straightforward. You record some audio and it appears straight in the playlist, which is where the song is. So, like, yeah, I don't think that's weird. Notes and automation. This might sound a little bit strange because when you think of recording, you think of sound, but most DAWs have a way for you to record what you've played on a MIDI keyboard by plugging it into your computer so that it will play the same notes at the exact same time as you played it on your MIDI keyboard. If you're wondering why don't you just put the notes in manually, why do you have to play it on a keyboard? For one, some people can play it faster on a keyboard than they can placing the notes manually. And two, if they do it by doing it on a keyboard, instead of it being placed on a grid and where it's always snapped to the correct position, it will sound much more like an actual human is playing it if it's actually a recording of the notes that they've played. Automation can even be done the same by turning knobs on your piano if your MIDI keyboard has not notes, but knobs on it. It can use that as a knob to change something else, one of the settings on your synthesizer or whatever, in real time while the song is playing. So all these really make sense, except for the top one, which even then it makes sense, it's just it shouldn't really refer to Edison without explaining what Edison is first. And everything, I mean, you have the option to either record audio or notes and automation. You could probably guess what everything does. It does both. Well, anyway.
Okay, I guess this first one? Please.
Fair enough, as I say.
Please select an audio input. Okay, fine. One. That's my mic. Oh, God. Stop. It's just playing. Okay, can we try that again? One. That's my mic. Oh, God. Stop. It's just playing. That wasn't even scripted. Oh, God. Okay, so I recorded this lovely vocal here. Where is it? It's not in here. It's not in my song, right? Is it? It's in my mixer though. Like it's here on this new rec track. But okay. You have to find the button helpfully labeled drag copy sample selection and drag it into your song and now it's there. Okay. How do I decide where it goes in the mixer? Is that Oh yeah. Now it's here in the audio. What? Okay, there's a secret panel in here that has my audio in it. And now I can put it on a channel. Oh God, this is fine. This is fine. No, you know what? This is.
I'll admit the audio recording. That is the main point I'm going to give to this guy. The audio recording FL Studio is garbage. As I say, that does not bother me because I mostly work with synthesized stuff. This is something I very rarely need to do. And of course, I know how to do it now, so it's like, whatever. And of course, there's lots of other benefits that come with FL Studio, which makes me think this is really not too much of an issue. But definitely, this is something they should work on.
This is not fine. This sucks. This is so much work, so much to keep track of. I just want to sit down, pick an instrument, make some music. Is that too much to ask for? Ableton Live just makes sense. I'm going to go through this.
Oh! Oh boy, he's making the it just makes sense argument. Okay, let's hear him out.
Same steps we did in FL, just to show you exactly how much easier it is to use Ableton Live right off the bat. Let's start with drums. Let's go to our drum library here. Now we have a helpful list of kits here. I like this 707 kit. I'm just going to double click on it. See what happens. Oh, hey, the name changed over here. This is now our drum track. Cool. Let's find a place to write some music. To do that, I just have to select this little section and insert an empty MIDI clip. Cool. Oh, look at that. Everything's labeled. It's not just all in one C line. Start.
Oh boy, I told you we'd get back to this. Okay, but just ignore that misclick. So there's an important distinction to make here. When this guy opens FL Studio and makes his drum beat, he makes them using these grey boxes, samplers. You put a sound effect in them and it plays it. And that sound effect can be a drum. Dismount. Yeah, I think it was filtered out a bit because of the filter in the track. Yeah. And it just plays that sound. And that's all it can play. So it's not like it could label the different, notes because, well, there's only one sound you can play with this instrument. So even though it's being played alongside these other sounds, those sounds are different instruments. So it couldn't have those as different notes on the piano roll because they're different instruments. And you might be like, okay, well, you've explained why it's bad, but it's still bad, isn't it? In Ableton, it's all like labeled on the notes, and you can play whichever one you want, and you only need one piano roll thing. Actually, in Ableton, he did not load up samplers. He loaded up a drum kit. You can load up a drum kit in FL Studio too. I can load up SPC, and oh look, if I now go into the piano roll, there you go, all labeled, all on different notes, and you can replace these with different samples to use any samples you want. So this brings up the question, how could someone who has clearly given FL Studio a decent chance not even know you can just use a drum kit in FL Studio instead of using a series of samples? Yeah, this is why I think this guy didn't really give any fair shot to FL Studio. And again, I think that's fine if he just wants to stick to using Ableton. I mostly have a problem with it just because he's also trying to say that it's objectively bad and it's like, the beginners are going to struggle so much just because they're using it.
And I want some more of that. I'm just going to grab the end of this and loop it. That's drums. Let's add a bass. I'm going to move to our next track here. Go to sounds, find a bass I like. And this one I'm going to play on my keyboard. That was pretty easy. Wait, where's my mixer? Oh, it's right here. It's literally the same track. I can just turn it down. And that's it. It's mixed. I didn't have to assign a mixer channel to it. I'm not losing track of my instruments halfway through. I'm not having to keep track of which pattern I was writing music on and getting everything mixed up. No. In Ableton, and literally every other program on Earth except FL Studio, one track is one instrument, is one mixer channel. And that's it. It's simple. If I want to record audio, I go to an audio track, enable it for recording, and press the record button. And now I'm recording audio, and I don't have to deal with something called Edison or anything else. It's just right there.
And I will admit, on this point, I will fully agree that it does seem like Ableton has the simpler way to work here. On this point. I would not agree on other points, at least not objectively. Subjectively, yes. Objectively, no.
This is why I'm so confused when people say Ableton is complicated. It literally could not be simpler to me to get started recording music. And when you compare back-to-back the process for making music in FL versus making music in Ableton, it seems like night and day, 1,000 times easier in Ableton. I will never understand people who say FL Studio is simpler.
So, I actually do have some things to say about this. There is this kind of air that, Ableton is complicated, and I kind of do agree with him a little bit here, that it seems like, where did this come from? Like, aren't these both just about as complicated as each other? I will agree, I wouldn't say that Ableton is necessarily complicated, it's just different compared to FL Studio, but I guess, again, considering most DAWs are not like FL Studio, it's more like FL Studio is different. But as I say, I don't really think it's necessarily more complicated. It's, again, just a different way of doing it. I feel like there's a reason why they got that reputation, and it's because of this elitism surrounding Ableton. I think that people just get the impression, oh yeah, I guess it's just more complicated because they start with FL Studio, and if they touch Ableton, the two used FL Studio to the point where Ableton seems weird just because they've already tried FL Studio a decent amount, and at the same time they got all these people telling them, oh yeah, well Ableton's the proper way to go. Oh, you're not even a real music producer if you're using FL Studio and all that, and oh, that's a toy, you know. It's like, you know, I imagine that's where the air of that's come from. It's kind of somewhat Ableton user's own fault that it's got that reputation now, even though it's not really like, you know, more complicated. Again, it's just different. If you're wondering, though, if I've got a counter argument to how he thinks this is so much more simple than the way it works in FL Studio, oh, I have one. I'm just saving it for a perfect opportunity.
You know what else is nice? If you copy something, you get to decide where you paste it. That's convenient. Okay.
Oh, yeah, and of course, you know, you can do that in FL Studio too. You just never figured out how to do it.
That covers the beginner side of things. I'm just going to rattle off a few quick things that are only probably going to make sense to the professionals out there, but trust me, these are all very good reasons to use Ableton over FL Studio. Routing. You know this nonsense where you have to deal with this crazy imaginary wire system just to get your side chains and group tracks working together and keep track of literal pieces of string in your mixer just to know where your sound is going? Yeah, that sucks. You know how you make a sidechain in Ableton? You click the sidechain button and then you pick where you want it to come from.
Oh boy, that's going to get interesting. Okay, so, new from template, empty. No, don't say changes because I might mess something up. Right. So what he's talking about with routing here is, let me... Actually, I'm just going to take some chords I already made in the past. Okay, so I have my chords. Oh wait, actually, I might make these lower pitched. Okay, so I have some chords here. Now let me add this to a mixer track. I can either do that by dragging it to a mixer track, or I can just click here and go to route to free mixer track, and it will do the first available one. We're now going to get into what routing is then. So, as you can see, this is already routed to something. You can see this wire coming down here and coming up here. And that means, hey, this track is connected to this track. And you might be like, why is it like that? Because if I disconnect that from this track, this track is the master track that I mentioned earlier. Anything that doesn't go through the master track won't be heard. So by default, automatically, all of these things are routed to the master, because obviously why would you not want something not routed to the master? Well, actually, there are reasons why, but all of them are kind of complex reasons that obviously a beginner wouldn't really ever encounter. So let's route it back. But say we want to route this to another track before it goes to the master. What we could do is disconnect it from here, connect it to here, and then connect it back to the master. There are some reasons why you might want to do this. A good example of that would be, let's see if I can do this. One reason why you might want to do this is vocoding. You can use a certain type of synth. I'm just using this for organization's sake. This isn't important. These are just separators to make things organized. You can use a certain type of effect called a vocoder to combine two sounds together in a very interesting manner. I'm of course oversimplifying this because the way vocoders work is actually really complicated. It's one of the more complicated effects you can try, but it sounds very cool. So let me get a second sound for this to work off of. Let's see. Let's get some strings. And take these. Do that. And copy them into the strings. The strings also will want their own mixer track, so let's give them one. They go into track 3. And let me actually route the strings through to the master. Now, if we route these both into this next track, then we can put in Vocodex, a vocoder, and it has these numbers here for the modulator and the carrier, the two things you're combining together. And if we only had one input to this, we wouldn't be able to combine two sounds together. But because we have two things going into this track, we can go 1 and 2. And now the carrier is the strings, because it's the second one, and the modulator is the piano. And again, what the carrier modulator specifically do, it gets confusing if I get into that. But basically, it's the two sounds we're combining together, and we get. I think I've made my point. Quite an interesting sound. And this has to be done by routing two things into one track. So this is an example of what he means by sidechaining. Essentially, this effect vocodex needs two other sounds to come into it for it to produce its own sound, which means that sounds have to not be routed to the master, but instead be routed to the vocodex. That's what he's talking about. Now, this in itself is a complicated idea, and it's very hard for you to represent this in a music-making software in a way that makes a lot of sense. Now, this is where we get into, is Ableton simpler, or is it more just a thing of preference? Because personally, I think, doesn't FL Studio's way make way more sense here? Because, well, I mean, okay, we have this sound, it's in track 2, we have this sound, it's in track 3, we plug track 2 into track 4, we plug track 3 into track 4, and we put the effect that combines two sounds in track 4, and it works. Like, I don't see why this is so complicated. Meanwhile, on Ableton, this could also arguably be simple, but it depends. This idea
you make a
that
sidechain in Ableton, you click the
sidechain button. Okay, sounds really simple. Did you know what sidechaining was before I explained it? No, you didn't. Now, if you don't know what sidechaining was, but you see these wires, you can already get the implication of what's going on. However, if you used Ableton as your first synthesizer and you weren't aware what a sidechain was, you look at this and you're like, what's this? What? You know, you don't know what that button does. And then when it says audio from, first of all, you can't even tell that it's the same thing as the sidechain. Like, this audio from thing was already here before you enabled sidechain, so you don't know that they're connected. And then you have to actually figure out, okay, how am I connecting this to stuff? You would have to realize that these names correspond to your tracks, which it doesn't really show you visually in any way. You see, this is the thing. It's all kind of implied. Like, I'm not saying, again, my aim here is not to say that Ableton is inferior. I'm showing how it's very subjective and how it can seem way simpler to this guy because he already knows what a sidechain is, and he already knows, because he knows what a sidechain is, it needs an audio input, and he knows that the audio from is going to be the audio input, and that these are the names of his different tracks, so it makes sense. Without that knowledge, though, nope, they wouldn't know what sidechain means, and they wouldn't know what the audio from is on about. They wouldn't even know what they're doing. In FL Studio, you would at least realize, okay, these wires mean that these things are connected, and considering we're talking about sound here, and when I route this to this, it comes out there, that does seem like this is putting this sound into here. It makes a lot more sense, in my opinion. So, again, it's one of those things where it's completely dependent on your perspective. It's very much subjective, and I don't think this is a very strong kind of perspective to take if you want to actually say, oh yeah, FL Studio is just a bad tool for making music. It's a different tool for making music.
You want a group track? You select a couple tracks, and you hit group. You can even group effects and even instruments together if you like the way they sound and you want to stack multiple different ones on top of each other.
You can also do this in FL Studio using layers, but we'll leave that for now.
Everyone gets super psyched over the FL piano roll, and I never really got it, and it kind of makes me think they've never used a piano roll in any other program. Like, the Ableton piano roll labels your drums. That alone is, like, incredible.
Again, he doesn't know that he didn't even use a drum kit in FL Studio, and if he did, then yes, they would be labeled.
Very few programs do that, and I really like.
And FL Studio is one of them.
All right, I'm done. I'll calm down now. I'm sorry. I want to reiterate, if you use FL Studio, that's great. I'm happy for you. And I'm happy you were able to figure it out. But if you're new to music production and you're trying to pick which software you're going to use, I hope it's a little clearer why I recommend Ableton Live over FL Studio.
So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate, my problems with this video, despite what you said, like, it's not to drag you down if you do make good music in FL Studio, is it does seem to have that air, even if unintentionally, of Ableton snobbery to it. And again, I want to reiterate, not every single Ableton user is an Ableton snob, but it's definitely enough of a problem that I see it commonly online, and it's very disappointing to see. But also, honestly, maybe a bit tinfoil hat like, but I feel like what led to the making of this video is this guy attributing the struggling of his students that he's been trying to teach, privately, the fact that they struggled to the fact they're using FL Studio instead of the fact that he doesn't understand how to use FL Studio. Because again, we've seen that many of the problems he had with FL Studio was simply due to the fact that he didn't know the correct way to do something. And again, you could say, oh, well, how's a beginner supposed to know the correct way to do something? That is literally true with every single software. It just very much rubs me the wrong way that clearly he's struggled to teach his students that have used FL Studio because of his lack of knowledge on FL Studio. And then the first thing he jumps to is, well, it's because they use FL Studio and not, well, maybe it's because I don't know much about FL Studio. Anyway, I don't have a satisfying way to really end this video because it's supposed to be low effort. I didn't really plan all much ahead, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, which probably won't be as weird. Bye.